I asked for America's best sniper, not a workshop technician. Commander Ryan Harrison didn't even look up when he said it. He just slammed the file shut loud enough that every man in that briefing room flinched except her. Maya Reeves stood there in oversized coveralls, 5'3", saying absolutely nothing. 24 hours later, she put a .50 caliber round through a moving target at 500 meters dead center, and when Ryan mocked her rifle as quite a toy for a technician, she looked him dead in the eye and said the words that would haunt him for the rest of his career. "You think that's a toy? That's a Barrett .50. Stay until the end and drop your city below, so I can see how far this story travels." The file hit the table at 0600 hours on a Tuesday, and Ryan Harrison hadn't slept since Sunday. That was the first thing anyone needed to understand about him. He didn't sleep when a mission was in motion. He didn't eat regular meals. He didn't make small talk in hallways, and he absolutely did not tolerate surprises delivered by Pentagon bureaucrats who thought they knew better than the men and women who actually bled for this country. Colonel Frank Mitchell had been standing in that briefing room for 11 minutes before Ryan walked in, which meant Mitchell had been rehearsing whatever he was about to say for at least 10 of those 11 minutes. Ryan could always tell. Mitchell had to tell he touched the collar of his uniform when he was nervous. Just a small adjustment, almost invisible to anyone who didn't know him. Mitchell touched his collar the moment Ryan cleared the doorway. That was the second thing Ryan noticed. The third thing he noticed was the woman standing beside Mitchell. She was small. That was the word his brain produced first automatically and without apology, because Ryan Harrison dealt in assessments the way other men dealt in pleasantries. And his first assessment of Maya Reeves was simply that she was small. 5'3", at the absolute most, swallowed almost entirely by a pair of mechanic coveralls that looked like they'd been borrowed from someone at least twice her size. Her hair was pulled back tight. No jewelry, no makeup, nothing that called attention to itself. She looked like she belonged in a workshop, not a briefing room. Ryan set his coffee down, looked at Mitchell, and waited. "Commander Harrison," Mitchell began, and he touched his collar again, which was not a good sign. "I want to introduce you to someone before we get into the operational briefing. This is Maya Reeves. She's been assigned as..." "As what?" Ryan said. He wasn't being rude. He genuinely needed to know the answer before Mitchell finished the sentence, because his brain was already running numbers, already cataloging what this woman's presence in this room at this hour could possibly mean. And none of the answers his brain was generating were answers he liked. "As your backup sniper," Mitchell said, "for the Nazari operation." The room went quiet. There were 6 other men in that briefing room, all of them senior. All of them experienced, all of them the kind of men who had learned a long time ago that silence was sometimes the most professional response available. But Ryan could feel their quiet. He could feel the particular texture of it, the way it wasn't simply absence of sound, but active suppression of reaction. Every man in that room was choosing not to say the thing that was sitting right at the front of his mind. Ryan didn't make that choice. "A backup sniper," he repeated. "That's correct. For a mission requiring a shot at over 3,000 meters. "Yes." Ryan picked up the personnel file. He opened it. He read 3 lines, then looked up at Maya Reeves, then looked back at Mitchell. "This says she's an armorer," he said. "She is an armorer," Mitchell confirmed. "She's also..." "I asked for America's best long-range shooter," Ryan said, and his voice was completely level, which was somehow worse than if he'd raised it. "I submitted a request through proper channels 8 days ago. I listed specific qualifications: verified kills at over 2,000 meters, operational experience in high-altitude environments, psychological evaluation clearance for extended solo deployment." He paused. "What I did not ask for was a workshop technician." The word landed in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Nobody moved. Maya Reeves didn't move either. She stood exactly where she'd been standing since Ryan walked in, her hands at her sides, her expression giving away absolutely nothing. She wasn't looking at Mitchell. She wasn't looking at the floor. She was looking directly at Ryan Harrison with a pair of dark eyes that were, he noticed despite himself, completely and entirely calm. That bothered him more than anything else in the room. Mitchell cleared his throat. "Commander, if you'll allow me to explain..." "Please," Ryan said, sitting down and opening his notebook. "Explain," Mitchell explained. It took 20 minutes, and by the end of those 20 minutes, the 6 senior men who had been sitting in careful silence had mostly stopped maintaining their careful expressions. Because what Mitchell laid out piece by piece was not a rushed personnel decision or a bureaucratic miscalculation. It was a classified intelligence assessment supported by 3 independent evaluations, suggesting that the shot required to eliminate Khalid Nazari, the man responsible for 17 American deaths over the past 4 years, including an operation in the Korengal Valley that Ryan himself had barely survived, could not be executed by any currently active sniper on the U.S. military's roster. Not at that distance, not in those conditions, not with the margins they were working with. The target has moved 3 times in the last 60 days, Mitchell said. Each time he's moved, he's added distance between himself and any viable firing position. Intelligence believes his next movement will put him beyond the range of every qualified shooter we have. He paused. Except one. Ryan didn't look up from his notebook. Every shooter we have, he said, is active military, with documented, verified operational records. Maya's record is documented, Mitchell said carefully. It's just not operational, he paused again. It's range. Range, Ryan repeated. She hasn't fired in a combat zone, Mitchell admitted, but her range performance over the past 6 years is unlike anything our evaluation teams have ever recorded. We're talking about consistent accuracy at distances that our best active shooters approach only in ideal conditions. Maya's numbers hold in wind, in cold, in altitude, in conditions designed specifically to produce failure. He looked at Maya, then back at Ryan. She's not here because someone filed the wrong paperwork, Commander. She's here because she's the best option we have. The room sat with that for a moment. Ryan finally looked at Maya. How long have you been in armor? He asked. 6 years, she said. Her voice was quieter than he expected, but steady. No nervousness in it, no apology. And before that, I was in training. What kind of training? The kind that didn't go the direction anyone planned, she said. Ryan studied her face for a long moment. Your father was James Reeves, he said. Something shifted in her expression then. Not much. Just the smallest compression at the corners of her eyes, a tightening that most people would have missed entirely. Ryan didn't miss it. Yes, she said. Ghost, he said. I know that name. Most people do, she said, and there was nothing challenging in it, nothing defensive, just a simple acknowledgement of a fact she had clearly been living with for a long time. Ryan looked back at Mitchell. She gets 1 shot, he said. Qualification. Tomorrow morning. If she passes, we talk. If she doesn't. He looked at Maya. She goes back to her workshop, and we find a different solution. Maya nodded once. What time, she said. Dawn, Ryan said. Front range facility. I'll set the parameters myself. Fine, she said. Ryan picked up his coffee. That's all. He was already looking at his notebook again when she walked out of the room, and he told himself that the fact that he watched her go just for a fraction of a second, just long enough to confirm she moved with more confidence than her size suggested, was simply professional assessment. He almost believed it. That night, Ryan Harrison sat in his quarters with the personnel file open on the desk in front of him, and he read everything. He read about Ghost Reeves. So Reeves. He knew most of it already, but he read it again. The Korengal Valley Operation 2003. The ambush that killed 8 men and should have killed 40. The decision Ghost made in the final minutes of that firefight, the one that gave 40 Marines enough cover to reach the extraction point, the one that left Ghost himself in a position he couldn't get out of. The posthumous Medal of Honor. The classified commendation that most of America would never know existed. Then he read about Maya. She'd started shooting at 7 years old, according to the records, her father's range private property outside Quantico. Weekends and summers, and every school holiday she could negotiate out of her mother. By the time she was 15, she was outperforming Marine Scout sniper candidates in unofficial evaluations her father arranged, apparently out of pride and apparently without anyone's permission. She'd applied to enlist at 18, tested higher than anyone in her evaluation group, been fast-tracked toward a specialized program that 3 senior officers had specifically designed around her skill set. Then Ghost died. Ryan read the timeline carefully. Ghost's death, the operation in the Korengal. Then 8 months later, Maya quietly withdrew from the program. No explanation filed, no appeals. She finished her armorer certification, applied for a position with a Marine maintenance unit, and spent the next 6 years rebuilding, repairing, and calibrating rifles she was never going to fire in combat. Ryan closed the file. He sat there for a while, not thinking anything specific, just letting the information settle. Then he picked up his phone and called the range coordinator. Add a moving target to tomorrow's qualification, he said. Don't tell her, activate it after the 10th shot. He hung up. He told himself it was standard procedure. He told himself he'd do it for any shooter whose record he hadn't personally verified. He told himself a lot of things that night. Most of them were probably even true. The Front Range facility in winter was a particular kind of brutal. The wind came down from the mountains without apology, and the cold had an edge to it that the temperature reading alone never quite captured. It was the kind of cold that got into the mechanics of things, that made metal contract and expand in ways that threw off calculations that punished anyone who hadn't prepared specifically for it. Ryan arrived at 05:30 an hour before first light. Maya Reeves was already there. She was standing at the firing line with her equipment case open on the bench beside her, her back to him, working in the dark with a small headlamp strapped to her forehead. He watched her for a moment before she heard him approach. She was breaking down and reassembling a Barrett M107 with the particular economy of motion that only came from doing something thousands of times. No wasted movement, no hesitation, no pauses to think about the next step, because the next step was already in her hands before her brain had finished naming it. He'd watched master gunsmiths work before. He'd watched some of the best technical operators in the military field strip complex weapon systems under impossible conditions. Maya's hands moved like neither of those things. Her hands moved like someone who wasn't thinking about the rifle at all. Like the rifle was just an extension of something she'd decided to do, and the doing of it was already finished somewhere in the space between intention and action. Ryan stood there for longer than he intended. Then he said, "You're early." She didn't startle. She also didn't turn around immediately, just completed the step she was on and set the bolt carrier group down before she looked over her shoulder. "So are you," she said. "I run this range." "I know." She turned back to her rifle. "I didn't want to waste your time with setup." Ryan walked to the range coordinator's station, picked up the qualification sheet he'd filed the night before, and walked back to the firing line. He stood 4 feet away from her and read the parameters out loud, not because she couldn't read them herself, but because he wanted to watch her face while he did it. 10 consecutive shots. 500-meter target. Wind is currently 14 knots from the northwest, gusting to 22. Temperature is 17 degrees Fahrenheit. Barometric pressure is 29.4, she said without looking up. "I checked when I arrived." Ryan stopped. "You checked barometric pressure when you arrived." "I check it when I arrive anywhere I'm going to shoot," she said as though this was obvious. "Doesn't everyone?" Ryan had been around shooters his entire adult life. Elite shooters, trained shooters. Shooters who had won matches and built reputations and carried those reputations into places where those reputations needed to be cashed in immediately or everyone died. He had met in his career perhaps 4 or 5 people who checked barometric pressure as a matter of personal habit without being asked before anyone told them it was relevant. He finished reading the parameters. Maya finished assembling the Barrett. She lay down in the prone position with the kind of practiced, unhurried movement that Ryan associated with people who were completely comfortable with exactly what they were about to do. She put her eye to the scope. She made 3 small adjustments that Ryan couldn't quite track with his naked eye. She put her finger off the trigger and breathed twice slowly, the way a person breathes when they're not trying to control their breathing, but simply allowing it to settle. Then she fired. The sound was enormous in the winter quiet. The Barrett .50 caliber was not a rifle that apologized for itself. It announced itself. It rewrote the atmosphere in a 20-foot radius every time it fired, and even the most experienced shooters flinched at the concussion the first time they stood next to one. Ryan didn't flinch. He watched the target through his spotting scope. Dead center. Maya chambered the next round. Breathed. Fired. Dead center. He watched her work through the next 8 rounds with the same rhythm, the same unhurried certainty. And by the 6th shot, the range coordinator had stopped pretending to look at his clipboard and was standing very still watching the target board. By the 8th shot, 2 of the Marine instructors who had been hanging around the facility on an unrelated matter had drifted to the edge of the firing line. By the 10th shot, there were 11 people standing behind Maya Reeves, all of them watching the target, bored, all of them quiet. 10 rounds, 10 dead center impacts. The grouping when Ryan finally put the spotting scope on it up close was so tight it looked like she'd fired once. Ryan picked up his radio. Activate the moving target, he said quietly. The target mechanism engaged. The standard 500-meter board dropped, and a new silhouette on a motorized rail system began moving laterally across the range at a pace that Ryan himself had specified fast enough to require a genuine lead calculation, fast enough to expose any shooter who was guessing rather than computing. Maya didn't move. She didn't ask a question. She didn't react to the change in any visible way, except that her right hand came off the receiver. She made 2 adjustments to the scope, and then she put her hand back. Ryan watched through his spotting scope. She breathed once. She fired. The round struck the moving silhouette directly through the center of mass. Not the edge. Not a partial hit that could be argued into adequacy. The center clean at a target moving laterally at speed on a cold and windy morning on a range she had visited for the first time 40 minutes ago. Nobody spoke. Ryan set down the spotting scope. He picked up the Barrett's empty case from the bench. She'd already cleared the weapon he noticed already on safe, already in the process of beginning her breakdown without being told, and he turned it over in his hand once. Then he walked to the firing line. He looked at the Barrett. He looked at Maya. He said, "Quite a toy for a technician." It came out exactly the way he intended it to, flat, almost offhand, the kind of thing you said when you were looking for a reaction, when you wanted to see what someone did with a comment that was designed to minimize everything they'd just done. Maya looked up at him. Her eyes were the same as they'd been in the briefing room, completely calm, completely clear. "You think that's a pointed, Barrett," she said. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't performing outrage. She was simply stating a correction the way you corrected someone who had said something factually wrong. "That's a Barrett .50, she said, "and I'm not here because of my father." She picked up the rifle and seated it in its case with the same unhurried precision she'd used to build it. "I'm here because I earned it," she said. She closed the case. She looked at Ryan one more time, not defiantly, not with any need for him to confirm anything, and then she picked up the case and walked toward the equipment shed without waiting to be dismissed. Ryan Harrison stood at the firing line in the 17-degree cold with the empty casing in his hand, and for the first time in a very long while, he had absolutely nothing to say. One of the Marine instructors appeared at his elbow. Sergeant Dolan, a man who had been shooting competitively for 15 years, and who had, in Ryan's presence, never been impressed by anything. Dolan looked at the target board. He looked at the spot on the range where Maya had been lying. He looked at Ryan. "Commander," he said. "Don't," Ryan said. "I wasn't going to say anything." "Good. I was just going to observe," Dolan said carefully, "that in 15 years on this range, I have never seen a grouping like that on a moving target in these conditions." "I said don't." "Yes, sir," Dolan said. And then, because he was Dolan and couldn't entirely help himself, Ghost Reeves' daughter. Ryan looked at him. "I know," Ryan said. He started walking toward the equipment shed, and then he stopped because he'd realized something in the last 90 seconds that he needed a moment to process. He'd designed that qualification himself. He'd set the parameters, chosen the wind conditions, specified the moving target protocol, built in the surprise element specifically to create the maximum possible opportunity for failure. He'd done it the way he'd done it because some part of him, some part he was going to have to examine honestly later, had wanted her to fail. Not because he doubted the intelligence assessment, not because he didn't believe the file, because she was small and quiet, and she'd walked into his briefing room in borrowed coveralls, and some part of Ryan Harrison had decided before she fired a single round that she couldn't possibly be what they said she was. He thought about Ghost Reeves in the Korengal Valley 2003. He thought about what the after-action reports had said about Ghost's physical appearance, his age, the way his own commanding officer had initially questioned his assignment to that operation. He thought about what Ghost had done anyway. Ryan reached the equipment shed. Maya was inside packing the last of her gear. He stood in the doorway. "Briefing tomorrow," he said. "Oh, 500, don't be late." Maya looked up. She studied his face for a moment with those calm, dark eyes. "I won't be," she said. Ryan nodded once. He turned and walked back toward the main facility, and he didn't look at the target board again because he didn't need to. The image was already in his head. The grouping so tight it looked like one shot. The moving silhouette clean through the center. The impossibility of it sitting in his chest like something he was going to have to make room for. Colonel Mitchell was waiting for him at the facility entrance, thermos in hand, reading something on his tablet. He looked up when he saw Ryan's face, and the particular expression Ryan was wearing apparently communicated everything Mitchell needed to know, because Mitchell's shoulders relaxed by approximately 3 degrees. Well, Mitchell said. Ryan took the thermos from him and poured himself a coffee. She passes, Ryan said. Mitchell nodded carefully, keeping any satisfaction out of his expression. She also sets up her qualification at 30 degrees before sunrise and checks barometric pressure as a matter of personal habit, Ryan said. I know, Mitchell said. You could have told me that. I thought it would be better if you saw it yourself, Mitchell said. Then quietly, she's been waiting 6 years for someone to let her show them. Ryan drank his coffee and looked out across the range, where the morning was just starting to become visible at the edges of the sky, gray and cold, and grudging. Set up the operational briefing for tonight, he said. I want full intelligence on the target location. Elevation profiles, wind pattern history approach, vectors, everything. Already requested, Mitchell said. And get me the file on Ghost Korangal mission, Ryan said. The complete file, everything that's still classified. Mitchell looked at him. Everything, he said. Everything, Ryan said. He handed back the thermos and walked inside. Down the hall, he could hear the distant sound of a rifle case being methodically closed, each latch clicking into place with the quiet certainty of someone who never left things undone. Ryan Harrison walked to his office and sat down and pulled out a fresh legal pad, and he began to write the operational parameters for a mission that was now, whether he'd been ready for it or not, completely and irrevocably real. One shot, 3,000 meters, a name on an intelligence file that had been on Ryan's personal radar since the night in the Korangal when his world had split into before and after. And a quiet woman in borrowed coveralls who had just done something in the cold Virginia dawn that Ryan was going to spend the rest of his life not quite being able to explain. He wrote across the top of the page, Nazari Operation Personnel Confirmed. Below that, after a moment, he added Reeves M. Primary Shooter. He stared at those 2 words for a long time. Then he kept writing. The operational briefing that night ran 4 hours and 20 minutes, and by the end of it, 3 of the 6 senior officers in the room had stopped arguing with Ryan's personnel decision. The other 3 had simply gone quiet, which Ryan had learned a long time ago was not the same thing as agreement, but was at least the same thing as temporary submission. And temporary submission was enough to move a mission forward. Maya sat at the far end of the table and said almost nothing for the first 2 hours. She had a legal pad in front of her. She wrote on it steadily in small, careful script, and she never asked anyone to repeat anything. When the intelligence officer, a thin man named Barrett, who spoke with the particular exhausted precision of someone who had been delivering bad news professionally for 20 years, put up the satellite imagery of the target compound and began walking through the elevation profiles and wind pattern data, Maya's pen stopped moving for exactly 4 seconds. Then it started again faster. Ryan noticed. He was across the table from her, which meant he could see her pad without trying to read it. She wasn't taking notes the way people took notes in briefings. She wasn't transcribing Garrett's words. She was doing calculations. He could see the numbers filling the page in small, dense clusters, wind adjustments, and elevation corrections and timing variables, and she was doing it in real time while Garrett was still talking, working through the math before anyone had finished presenting the problem. Ryan looked away before she caught him watching. Garrett finished his presentation. He looked around the table. Questions. One of the senior officers, a colonel named Breck, who had been one of the 3 maintaining studied silence, said, "What's the confirmed altitude at the firing position?" 8,400 feet above sea level, Garrett said. Breck nodded slowly. In the target distance from that position. Best viable position puts us at approximately 3,240 meters. Garrett said, give or take 20 meters depending on final approach and exact placement. Breck looked at the imagery for a long moment. Then he looked at Ryan. Then he looked for the first time directly at Maya. You've shot at altitude, he asked her. Not confrontational, genuinely asking. Yeah, Maya said. Where? Colorado, Montana. Personal trips, not operational. What altitude? 10,000 feet mostly. A few sessions at 11.2. Breck was quiet for a moment. And your accuracy numbers held. It wasn't quite a question. They held, Maya said. Breck looked back at the imagery. All right, he said, and that was all he said. But the weight of it was sufficient. That was the 3rd officer, which meant that for the first time since Maya Reeves had walked into Ryan's briefing room that morning, the room was actually functionally unified behind the same operational plan. Ryan didn't let himself feel relieved about that. Relief was something you felt after. During was not a time for relief. Wheels up in 72 hours, he said. I want every team member's gear inspected by 0800 tomorrow. Maya, you'll work with Sergeant Dolan on weapon selection for the transit and the mission itself. I want your equipment list on my desk by 1400. Maya nodded. One more thing, Garrett said, and something in his voice made Ryan look at him carefully. Garrett was shuffling his papers, not making eye contact with anyone, which was never a good sign from an intelligence officer. Intelligence officers were trained to maintain eye contact. When they didn't, it meant they were about to say something they'd rather not say. The intelligence on Nazari's movement patterns, Garrett said. We have a 48-hour window. After that, our source goes dark and we lose the location confirmation. He finally looked up. We don't know when we'll have another window like this. Could be months, could be longer. Could be never, Breck said. Could be never, Garrett confirmed. Ryan looked at the map. 48 hours, 72 hours to deploy, which already exceeded the window, which meant they were going to have to move faster than 72 hours, which meant the inspection timeline he'd just laid out was already obsolete. He picked up his pen. New timeline, he said. Wheels up in 36 hours. Inspections start at 0400. Maya. He looked at her. Equipment list by 0600. Maya had already turned to a new page on her legal pad. 0600, she said. Done. The briefing broke up at 22:30 hours. People filed out in twos and threes, and Ryan stayed at the table with the satellite imagery spread in front of him and a cold cup of coffee at his elbow, running the approach vectors one more time in his head. He heard someone stop in the doorway. He looked up. Maya was standing there with her legal pad tucked under her arm and her jacket already on. The wind pattern data, she said. Garrett's projections for the firing window. What about them? They're based on afternoon readings, she said. The compound is in a valley orientation that creates a channeling effect between 0600 and 0900. Morning winds are going to run differently than what his models show. Ryan set down his pen. How do you know that? The elevation profile on the western ridgeline, she said. The shape of it. It's going to accelerate and shift anything coming from the northwest by at least 10 to 15 degrees during the morning hours. She paused. I'd want to build in an earlier firing window than the briefing assumed. Pre-dawn if possible, before the valley thermals establish. Ryan looked at the imagery for a long moment. He picked his pen back up and made a note. I'll have Garrett rerun the wind models with a morning orientation, he said. Maya nodded. She started to turn away. Reeves, Ryan said. She stopped. The elevation calculation on your pad, he said. The numbers you were running during the briefing. She didn't answer immediately. You saw that, she said. I see everything in my briefing room, he said. She looked at him steadily. And nothing, he said. I just want to know if the numbers you ran match Garrett's baseline. A pause, then. They're close. His density altitude correction is slightly off. I'd adjust upward by about 12 feet of drop at that range. It won't matter much, but at 3,000 meters, not much becomes meaningful faster than people expect. Ryan wrote that down too. Get some sleep, he said. You too, she said. Then she was gone, and Ryan sat alone in the briefing room with the satellite imagery and the new notes and the particular feeling, not quite admiration, not yet, but something in that direction of having said something wrong about someone and then being shown systematically and without drama exactly how wrong you'd been. He didn't sleep much that night. He wasn't sure Maya slept at all. At 0545 the next morning, Ryan found her already in the equipment room with Sergeant Dolan, the two of them deep in what was clearly not a first conversation of the morning. Dolan had his arms crossed and was nodding with the expression of a man who had started a conversation expecting to teach something and had ended up learning something instead. And Maya had 3 rifles laid out on the bench in front of her and was explaining the specific modifications she'd made to the one on the far left. Ryan stood in the doorway and listened for a moment without announcing himself. The chassis adjustment improves the cheek well consistency at altitude, Maya was saying. When the temperature drops below 20 degrees and you're working in gloves, your grip changes. Minor, but minor is what gets you at this distance. I wanted the interface points to compensate for that before we're in the field, not after. Dolan looked at the rifle. You modified this last night. This morning, Maya said, around 0300. Dolan looked at her. You were in the armory at 0300. I had the list to finish, and I wanted to have the rifle ready to test before the inspection window, she said simply, as though this explained everything which Ryan supposed it did. He walked in. Dolan looked up. Commander, she's already finished the equipment list, and she made modifications to the primary that I'd want your sign-off on. Ryan walked to the bench and looked at the rifle. He looked at the modifications. He looked at Maya. Walk me through it, he said. She did. It took 12 minutes, and by the end of those 12 minutes, Ryan had asked 4 questions, and she had answered all 4 of them with the specificity of someone who had thought through the exact objection before the question was finished leaving his mouth. The modifications were not dramatic. They were small, precise, targeted adjustments to the exact failure points that cold weather, high-altitude shooting created, and every one of them was grounded in a clear and defensible mechanical logic. Ryan signed off on the modifications. He turned to leave and then stopped. Dolan, he said, give us a minute. Dolan picked up his clipboard and walked out without comment. He was good at that, Dolan, knowing when to disappear. Ryan turned back to Maya. She was looking at him with that same patient steadiness that he was beginning to understand was not composure adopted for his benefit, but simply the way she existed, the natural resting state of a person who had been living inside her own head with a very large and very specific purpose for a very long time. The Korengal file, Ryan said. Something moved in her face. Quick, then gone. You read it, she said. Last night. Yes. And I want you to know that I read it, he said. Not because it changes anything about the mission or about your assignment, but because he stopped. He started again. I was at the Korengal in 2004. The year after. I read the after-action reports. I knew the names. I knew your father's name. But I hadn't put it together with yours until Mitchell said it yesterday, and I should have. I should have looked harder before I opened my mouth in that briefing room. Maya was very still. You didn't owe me that, she said. No, Ryan agreed, but you'd already earned it so. A pause. He never told me about the Korengal, she said. I was 13. He came home, and he was different. You could see it on him, the weight of something, and I asked him what happened, and he said, some days cost more than others, and you pay it anyway. That's all he ever said about it. That sounds like him, Ryan said, from what I know. You would have liked him, Maya said. He had zero patience for people who underestimated things based on appearances. Ryan looked at her for a moment. Yeah, he said, I'm getting that. She almost smiled, not quite, but almost. Equipment list is on Dolan's desk, she said. I also noted the wind correction in the appendix for Garrett's revised models. I saw, Ryan said. He picked up his jacket from the chair he draped it on when he walked in. 36 hours, he said. I know, she said. He walked out. In the hallway, he passed Dolan, who was leaning against the wall with his clipboard and the expression of a man professionally pretending he hadn't heard any of that. She squared away, Dolan said, looking at the ceiling. She was squared away before she got here, Ryan said, and kept walking. The 36 hours moved the way pre-mission time always moved, too fast in the moments when you needed more of it and too slow in the moments when you needed it gone. Ryan ran his team through 2 full equipment checks, a communications protocol review, and a compressed rehearsal of the extraction plan that revealed 3 gaps he hadn't seen in the briefing room. He fixed the gaps. He ran the rehearsal again. Maya was present for all of it, and she was quiet for most of it, and the 2 times she spoke up, it was to identify a problem before anyone else in the room had spotted it. The first time was during the communications review when she pointed out that the frequency they'd assigned for the sniper spotter link had a documented interference issue in high-altitude terrain with the specific radio models they were carrying. The second time was during the extraction rehearsal when she noted that the primary extraction route passed within 400 meters of a ridgeline position that would give a competent observer a direct sight line to the rally point. Both times, Ryan made the correction. Both times, nobody said anything, but the quality of the silence in the room shifted slightly, the way a room's air shifts when something is recalibrated. On the second equipment check, Sergeant Brannigan, a veteran of 3 combat tours, who had been on Ryan's team for 18 months and who was not known for volunteering positive assessments of anyone he hadn't personally worked with, in the field checked Maya's kit and handed it back to her without a word. Then he said, your pack weight. 58 pounds, Maya said, with the Barrett system. 64. Brannigan looked at her frame. He was not subtle about it. I carry it fine. Maya said, and her voice had no edge in it. Just information. I know you do, Brannigan said and handed her the sign-off sheet. I checked. Maya looked at him. You looked at my range records, she said. I look at everyone's records, Brannigan said. I've been on this team for a year and a half. I like to know who I'm trusting with my life, he paused. Your record is notable. Thank you, Maya said. That wasn't a compliment, Brannigan said. It was an observation. Compliment comes later, if we come back. Maya nodded once. Fair enough. Brannigan moved on to the next team member, and Ryan, who had been close enough to hear all of it, decided that was probably the most positive reception Brannigan had ever given a new team member prior to a first mission. He marked it down internally as a good sign and kept moving. The flight to the forward operating base in eastern Afghanistan took 14 hours with one refueling stop, and Ryan spent most of it reviewing intelligence updates on a laptop with the screen tilted away from the cabin aisle. Garrett had sent 3 revised assessments in the past 12 hours. Nazari's location was confirmed. His security rotation had been partially mapped. There was a possible early morning movement window that matched exactly what Maya had predicted in the briefing room, a commander's security check personal, conducted before the compound fully woke up. Ryan read that last assessment twice. He thought about what Maya had said. Experienced commanders verify security personally. He dismissed it in the briefing room. Not out loud, but internally in the part of his assessment process where he filed things under probable, possible, or worth watching. He had filed Maya's prediction under worth watching, which was the category that translated to polite skepticism. Garrett's latest assessment had moved it to probable. Ryan closed the laptop. Across the aisle, Maya was asleep. She was sitting perfectly upright, her arms folded to her head just barely tilted to the right, and she was sleeping the way some people slept, before things, not restless, not performing calm, just genuinely offline, her system, doing exactly what systems were supposed to do when there was an opportunity to restore before the next demand. Ryan had commanded enough people to know that the ones who could sleep like that before operations were not the ones who weren't taking it seriously. They were the ones who had done everything they could do and understood that worrying about the rest was metabolically expensive and operationally useless. He looked away from her and looked out the window at the dark below. He thought about Ghost Reeves' final recorded words, which he had read in the classified file the night before, and which he had not been able to stop thinking about since. Ghost had recorded a mission log update 12 minutes before the final engagement in the Korengal. It was brief. Standard situation report, grid coordinates, enemy contact status. Then at the end, something that was clearly not standard that the transcriptionist had apparently included because it was on the recording and there was no protocol for excluding it. Ghost had said, she's going to be better than me. Not just at this, at everything. Ryan had read that 3 times. He was reading it again now inside his head, somewhere over the mountains, while Ghost's daughter slept across the aisle and the aircraft carried them all toward the thing that was waiting. They landed at 0340 local time, and the cold hit immediately, the particular dense cold of high-altitude Afghanistan at the end of winter, the kind of cold that had its own weight and its own texture, and that made the air feel like something you were moving through rather than breathing. Ryan organized the team's ground transport while the equipment was unloaded, and he watched Maya step off the aircraft and take one long, slow breath of the mountain air, and then look at the ridgeline to the east with an expression that was very difficult to read. You all right, he said, because he was near enough that it wasn't a broadcast question. Fine, she said. Then it's bigger than the imagery showed. It always is. She nodded slowly. Yeah. They moved to the forward operating base, and Ryan called an immediate team brief in the operations room. The local commander, a weathered Special Forces major named Castillo, who had been running operations in this province for 7 months, gave them a ground update that took 18 minutes and that was uniformly worse than the pre-mission intelligence had suggested. The primary approach or route had been compromised, not by enemy activity by a rockslide 2 days prior that had taken out a section of the trail that the mission plan depended on. The alternate approach added 4 hours to the transit, which meant, given the intelligence window they were working with, that if they were going to position for a dawn firing window, they needed to leave the base in less than 90 minutes. Ryan looked at the map. He looked at Castillo. How confident are you in the alternate route? 70%, Castillo said. We've used it twice. It's passable. It's also exposed for about 800 meters in the middle section. Exposed to what? Observation posts. Enemy has two that we know of. Possible third that we flagged, but not confirmed. Castillo looked at him levelly. I'm not telling you not to go. I'm giving you what I have. Ryan nodded. He looked around the room. Brannigan was studying the map with his jaw set. The two other team members, Kowalski and Ferris, were doing their own assessment calculus. Maya was looking at the elevation profile along the alternate route. 4 hours, she said. Ryan looked at her. 4 hours on the alternate route, she said. We need to leave in 80 minutes to hit the firing position by dawn. That's a hard timeline. She paused. But the morning window Garrett updated yesterday, the one that matches the commander's personal security check pattern, that window closes by 0730 at the latest. If we miss that window, we don't get another guaranteed opportunity at a location-confirmed shot. I know, Ryan said. I'm not saying push the timeline, she said. I'm saying it's tight enough that we don't have margin for anything to go wrong on the route. And if something goes wrong, she looked at him directly, then we adapt. Ryan looked at the map for another 5 seconds. Then he looked up. 80 minutes, he said to the room. Full kit. We move at 0430. Nobody argued. In the 78 minutes that followed, Maya was simultaneously the most efficient and the most contained person in the forward operating base. She ate what was available without comment. She checked her rifle one final time with the quiet economy of someone who had already done it correctly and was simply confirming what she already knew. She filled her hydration system, loaded her pack, and sat in the operations room with her legal pad doing the last of her calculations for the expected conditions at the firing position. At 4:12, Brannigan appeared in the doorway with his pack already on. You ready? He said to Maya. She looked up from the pad. She considered the question with her usual seriousness. I've been ready for 6 years, she said. Brannigan looked at her for a moment. Then he said, Yeah, I believe that. He walked out. Maya looked back at her calculations for another 30 seconds. Then she closed the pad. She picked up her pack. She put the rifle system over her shoulder with the practiced ease of someone who had done exactly this 10,000 times in exactly this configuration until the weight and the geometry of it were as natural as her own arm. Ryan was in the doorway. 4:30, he said. I'm ready, she said. They moved out into the dark at exactly 4:36, people moving in a line up the mountain in the cold and the silence. And Ryan was third in the column, and Maya was fourth. And the weight of everything they were carrying, equipment and history, and the particular gravity of unfinished things moved with them up into the dark. For the first hour of the climb, no one spoke. The alternate route was what Castillo had called it, passable. It was also steep, and the section he'd marked as exposed was worse on the ground than it had looked on the map, the way these things always were. The map being a flat lie about a world that was nothing but dimension and gradient and the specific cruelty of rock under boots at altitude in the dark. They moved through the exposed section in pairs, staggered, minimizing the window in which all of them would be visible from the observation post positions. Ryan went last in his pair. He crossed the exposed ground at a controlled jog, which was not comfortable with 64 pounds of equipment, but was necessary, and he reached the cover of the ridgeline and looked back and counted heads. 6, all 6, he breathed. They stopped to rest at a natural rock shelter 2 hours into the climb. 6 people sitting in the dark, breathing hard, not talking. Maya's breathing was controlled, not easy. The altitude and the pack weight were doing what they did to everyone, but controlled. She had her hand on the rifle case, and she was looking up at the ridge line above them with the focused expression of someone doing mental work. Ryan sat next to her. He didn't mean to specifically. It was simply where there was room. Talk to me about the wind, he said quietly. She didn't look at him. At this elevation, we're in the transition layer between the valley floor thermals and the upper mountain flow. It's going to be inconsistent until we get above 8,000 feet. After that, it should stabilize, but the direction I'm reading from the ground vegetation up there. She nodded at the slope above them. Suggests the channeling effect I mentioned in the briefing is going to be stronger than I estimated. Stronger how? Maybe 20 degrees of shift instead of 15, she said. And possibly gusting, not steady. She paused. I'll know more when we're at the position. Can you make the shot in gusting conditions at that range? Ryan asked. Not a challenge, a genuine operational question. She was quiet for a moment. I won't fire in a gust, she said. I'll wait for the pause. Every gust has a pause. The shot goes in the pause. And if the target window closes before you get a pause, another pause, then we lost the window, she said, and we find another one. Ryan looked at her profile in the dark. That's the right answer, he said. She looked at him then, briefly but clearly. I know, she said. And then, my father told me that. He said the hardest part of shooting isn't the shot, it's knowing when not to. Ryan didn't say anything. He told me when I was 16, she said. I didn't understand it then. I thought it was just a philosophical thing, something you said. I understand it now. When did you understand it? She thought about it. When I stopped shooting, she said quietly. When I went to the armory and spent 6 years making sure other people's rifles were perfect. She paused. I had a lot of time to think about what he meant. Ryan sat with that. The team rested for 8 minutes. Then Ryan stood up and said, move. And the column reformed and they went back up into the dark. With 40 minutes left before the estimated dawn window, Kowalski, who was on point, stopped the column with a raised fist. Everyone froze. Ryan moved up alongside Kowalski. Kowalski pointed. 40 meters ahead, barely visible in the pre-dawn gray, there was something wrong with the trail. A shape. Too regular. Not rock. Ryan looked at it for 10 full seconds. Then he understood what he was looking at and his stomach dropped. An improvised explosive device. Ground-mounted small, positioned at the exact narrowing of the trail where the rock walls forced the column into single file. Whoever had placed it knew how approach routes worked. Whoever had placed it had done this before. Ryan moved back down the column. He stopped at Maya. IED on the trail. He said, his voice so low it barely existed. We need to divert. There's a ridgeline bypass to the east. It adds 40 minutes. Maya looked at him. 40 minutes. They both knew what 40 minutes meant. It meant the dawn window, the commander's security check, the single location confirmed opportunity was gone. It meant the intelligence that Garrett had built a 48-hour case around would expire before they could use it. It meant Khalid Nazari would move before they got a shot. Ryan watched Maya's face run through all of that. Then she said, east bypass. Let's go. No argument, no visible grief about the window. Just the next decision made cleanly. They diverted. They moved fast. Faster than was comfortable, faster than was safe in the absolute technical sense, but within the margin that Ryan set and held, because sometimes the margin you have is the margin you work with, and you don't get to negotiate with the mountain. They reached the firing position at 0614. The target compound was below them, 3,247 meters give or take across the valley. Brannigan set up spotting position immediately. Kowalski and Ferris went to perimeter security. Ryan moved to Maya's side as she established her prone position with the Barrett and began the final setup sequence. The compound was quiet below. The gate was closed. Ryan checked his watch. 617. The commander's security check window, per Garrett's last assessment, opened at 0600 and ran until 0730 at the latest. They were inside the window. Barely. Wind, he said. Northwest 9 knots, relatively steady, Maya said. She was looking through the scope. No gusts in the last 2 minutes. Target position. Gates closed, no movement. She paused. Yet. Ryan settled next to her with his spotting scope. The valley below was gray and still in the early light. The compound sat exactly where the satellite imagery had put it, which was a small relief, the map having told the truth for once. Ryan scanned the perimeter. 2 visible guards at the outer wall, static, not moving with any urgency. They waited. 623, 624. At 0631, Brannigan said quietly, West wall, someone's moving. Ryan shifted the spotting scope. At the west side of the compound, a door had opened. A figure stepped out, moving with the deliberate, unhurried purpose of someone who was checking something specific, not reacting to something unexpected. Maya had already seen it. I have movement, she said. Her voice was absolutely level. Can you confirm identity at this range? Ryan said. Not yet. Give me 30 seconds. Ryan gave her 30 seconds. He watched the figure move along the inside of the west wall, pausing at the guard positions, exchanging words that were invisible at this distance. Ryan, Maya said. It was the first time she'd used his first name. He looked at her. She was still in the scope. He's checking his own guards, she said. Personal check, just like I said. Ryan looked back at the compound. He looked at the figure moving along the wall. He thought about Garrett's file. He thought about the physical description, the movement patterns, the specific behavioral signatures that intelligence had spent 4 years cataloging for exactly this moment. The figure stopped at the final guard position. He turned, and even at 3,000 meters, even through the spotting scope, there was something about the posture, the way the figure stood with the particular authority of a man accustomed to being the most dangerous thing in any room he entered. Ryan said, "Target confirmed." The wind shifted. Maya said, "Hold." Ryan held. 8 seconds. Then wind dropping, steady at 7. A pause. Entering the pause. Ryan put his eye back to the spotting scope. His hand moved to the radio to call the wind correction, the calculation already running in his head, the numbers that 6 years of training and operational experience produced automatically, and he was about to speak. When Maya said, "I have it," Ryan stopped. She had already made the correction. She breathed once. She pressed the trigger. The Barrett fired. The sound left them traveled across 3,247 meters of mountain air and morning stillness. 4 seconds. 4 seconds was a very long time. Ryan had his eye to the spotting scope. The figure at the compound wall simply ceased to be standing in the particular irreversible way that a precise long-range round made happen, and the morning below them did not immediately react because the sound of the shot had not arrived yet, and the guards had not yet understood what had happened to the man they had been standing beside. Ryan lowered the spotting scope. He looked at Maya. She had already cleared the bulb. Her eye was still in the scope, running a confirmation, doing exactly what you were trained to do after a shot at that distance. Her hands were perfectly steady. Her breathing was calm. Then she raised her head from the rifle. She looked at Ryan. Neither of them said anything for 3 full seconds. Then Brannigan said from the spotting position, his voice carrying the particular quality of a man who had seen a great many things and was now seeing something he genuinely had no category for, "Target is down. I confirm, target is down." Maya closed her eyes, just for a second, just one breath in and out with her eyes closed. Then she opened them, and the compound below them was beginning to react, figures, moving voices starting to carry faintly on the wind, and there was no more time for anything except the next thing and the thing after that. "Nazari is down," Ryan said into the radio, his voice controlled, operational, the voice he used when everything else had to wait. "Extract now, all elements execute." He looked at Maya. She was already breaking down the rifle. Her hands were still steady. But Ryan had seen her eyes when she opened them, and he knew with the certainty of a man who had seen combat and its aftermath and the particular weight it placed on people who were honest enough not to pretend it cost nothing, that the steadiness of her hands was not the whole story. The whole story was going to take longer to tell. But right now the mountain was about to get very loud, and there was only one direction to move. "Let's go," Ryan said. And Maya Reeves picked up her rifle and followed him down into the noise. The mountain did not care that Khalid Nazari was dead. That was the first thing Ryan understood in the 60 seconds after the shot. The 60 seconds when the compound below them was transitioning from routine morning security into something violent and organized, and pointed directly at the ridgeline where six Americans were standing with their equipment half-packed and nowhere near enough distance between themselves and whatever was coming. The radio crackled at 06:36, 4 minutes after the shot. It was Castillo at the forward operating base. Eagle 1 were reading elevated vehicle activity on the eastern approach road. 2 trucks, possibly 3, moving fast toward your position. Ryan was already moving. "Copy, we're on the extract. ETA to rally point. 40 minutes at your current pace." Ryan looked at the terrain between their position and the rally point. He looked at his team. He looked at the sky, which was lightning fast now. Morning arriving without consideration for anyone's plans. 40 minutes was a number that assumed nothing went wrong. Nothing had gone wrong yet, which meant by the arithmetic of these situations, something was about to. "Move," Ryan said. "Now, fast." The column reformed and went down the east slope at a pace that was not comfortable and was not designed to be. Brannigan was on point, Kowalski behind him, then Ferris, then Maya with the rifle system, then Ryan, then the 6th team member, Specialist Tran, who was carrying the communications equipment and who had not said a single word since they'd reached the firing position, which was either professionalism or terror, and Ryan didn't have time to find out which. They had been moving for 6 minutes when Brannigan stopped the column again. Ryan felt it before he heard it, a change in the texture of the silence, something mechanical and low coming from the north, from above them on the ridgeline they had just left. He looked up. A drone, small commercial grade, moving in a tight search pattern over the position they had occupied 11 minutes ago. Ryan's blood went cold. Not because of the drone itself, because of what a drone at that location at that moment meant. It meant someone had anticipated the firing position. It meant the approach route they'd taken had been observed, tracked, or calculated. It meant the trucks Castillo was reading on the eastern approach road were not a reaction to the shot. They were a response to a plan that had been in motion before the shot happened. Nazari's people had known someone was coming. They hadn't known when. They hadn't known exactly where. But they had known enough to pre-position to have a contingency to be ready to move the moment the shot confirmed what they suspected. Ryan keyed his radio. Castillo, the vehicle's on the eastern approach. How long have they been moving? A pause. Then intel says movement started approximately 40 minutes ago. 40 minutes ago was before the shot. Ryan closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. Then he opened them. Eagle 1 to all elements, he said. We have a compromise situation. Eastern extract is blocked. I'm calling for alternate route Bravo. Acknowledge. Brannigan acknowledged. Kowalski acknowledged. Ferris, Tran. He looked at Maya. She was already looking at him. Route Bravo, he said. You know what that means for the timeline. It means we don't make the helicopter window, she said. It means we don't make the helicopter window, he confirmed. Maya looked at the drone still working its pattern overhead. She looked at Ryan. How long until they triangulate from the drone's search pattern? 20 minutes, Ryan said. Maybe less. Then we don't stand here, she said. They moved. Route Bravo was not a route that anyone had selected because it was good. It existed on the map as a contingency, which was the operational word for a path that someone had identified as theoretically passable and then hoped they would never need to use. It ran north along a secondary ridgeline before cutting west and dropping into a ravine that eventually connected to a secondary landing zone that Castillo could reach by ground vehicle in approximately 90 minutes. The problem was the ravine section, 700 meters of exposed descent on loose rock visible from 2 of the 3 suspected enemy observation points at a pace that their combined equipment load made genuinely dangerous. Brannigan said what all of them were thinking, which was exactly why Ryan valued Brannigan. 700 meters of that slope in daylight with this load were going to be visible for 11 minutes minimum. I know, Ryan said. If they've got eyes on those OPs, I know, Ryan said again. So what's the play? Ryan looked at the terrain. He looked at his team. He did the math that you did in these situations. The math where the variables were time and exposure and the specific weight of what you were carrying and the number of people you were responsible for bringing home. And the math never came out clean. It never came out to a number that felt like a good answer. It just came out to the least bad answer available. We move as fast as we can through the exposed section, he said. Suppression assets ready. If we take contact, Brannigan and Kowalski hold position and return fire. Everyone else continues to the ravine bottom. We do not stop as a group. We do not wait as a group. We move. He looked at Maya specifically when he said the last part. That includes you, he said. You do not stop to engage. Your job is to get the rifle system to the secondary LZ. Maya held his gaze. And if someone goes down, she said, then we deal with that, he said. But the rifle goes to the LZ. A pause. Understood, she said. They hit the exposed section at 06:59. 11 minutes, 700 meters. Ryan counted his steps and his seconds in the distance between each team member and the next, and the first 3 minutes of the descent were the kind of 3 minutes that expanded into something much larger, where every footfall seemed both too loud and too deliberate, and the open ground above them felt like something watching. At the 4-minute mark, Tran slipped. It wasn't a fall. It was a stumble, one boot finding the wrong angle on the loose rock, his body overcorrecting with 60 pounds of communications equipment on his back. And for about 1.5 seconds, Tran was genuinely on the edge of a slide that would have taken him 30 feet down the rock face. Maya caught him. She had been directly behind Tran and she moved without hesitation. her left hand closing on the back of his pack harness with enough force to arrest his momentum, her right hand finding purchase on a rock outcropping that she braced against until Tran got his feet back under him. The whole thing took 4 seconds. Nobody said anything. Tran looked at her. He was breathing hard, and there was something raw and immediate on his face, the look of someone who has just physically felt the distance between being fine and not being fine. "Keep moving," Maya said quietly. Tran kept moving. Ryan had seen it from 6 feet ahead. He filed it away in the category that he filed things when he didn't have time to process them properly. Important. Deal with later. They reached the ravine bottom at 0713, all 6 together. Ryan counted heads before he let himself breathe. Then Castillo's voice came over the radio, and Ryan's breathing stopped again. "Eagle 1, we've lost the primary helicopter. Engine issue on startup. The bird is grounded. I'm working on an alternate, but it's going to be..." A pause. "It's going to be a while." Ryan looked at his team. Brannigan looked back at him with an expression that said, "I'm not going to say I told you so, but we both know I saw this coming." "How long is a while?" Ryan said into the radio. 2 hours minimum, Castillo said. "I'm working every asset I have." "We can't wait 2 hours at the secondary LZ, Ryan said. "We'll be located in 40 minutes. "I know that," Castillo said, and he sounded like a man who was doing his absolute best and was acutely aware that his best was not going to be sufficient. "I'm working it." Ryan lowered the radio. He looked at the ravine walls. He looked at his team. He looked at the map. There was a third position. It wasn't on the official route card because it was barely a position at all. A natural rock shelf on the north wall of the ravine, accessible from a ledge traverse that Castillo's ground team had noted as potentially defensible in an earlier reconnaissance report. The report had used the word potentially with the careful hedging of someone who meant possibly but didn't want to commit to it. Ryan committed to it now. "We move to the shelf position," he said. "We set a perimeter. We wait for Castillo's asset, and we hold." Nobody argued. Arguing was for people who had better options. They traversed to the shelf position at 0731, and Ryan set the perimeter with Brannigan and Kowalski on the outer positions and Ferris and Tron on the inner. And Maya he put in the center with the rifle, not because the Barrett was going to be tactically useful at the ranges they were likely to engage at from this position, but because the rifle was the mission's proof of concept, its living record, and if they were going to hold this position, then the rifle was what they were holding it for. At 0748, the radio came back. It was not Castillo. It was a voice Ryan hadn't heard in 14 months, belonging to a man he had not expected to hear from in this context at all. "Eagle 1, this is Warhammer Actual. I have a report that you're in the wind. Talk to me." General David Kwan, Theater Commander. 14 months ago, Ryan had briefed Kwan on an operation in a different country with different stakes, and Kwan had sat through Ryan's entire briefing and then asked 2 questions that had identified the 2 critical gaps in Ryan's plan before Ryan had left the room. Kwan was on the net because Kwan was paying attention. Ryan keyed the radio. "Warhammer Eagle 1, we are in a hold position awaiting extract. Primary bird is down. We are secure for now." "Status of the objective," Kwan said. "Objective complete," Ryan said. A pause. A particular kind of pause, the kind that happened when very senior people absorbed very significant news. "Say again, Eagle 1. "Objective complete," Ryan said. "Confirmed." Another pause. "Eagle 1, you have everything you need." "Working on it, sir," Ryan said. "You've got 40 minutes before I've put every available asset in that valley," Kwan said. "Don't make me do that." "Copy," Ryan said. "We won't." He lowered the radio. Maya was sitting with her back against the rock wall behind him, the rifle across her knees, listening to everything. She caught his eye. 40 minutes, she said. 40 minutes, he confirmed. She nodded. Then she said, "We should check Tran's ankle. He's been favoring his left foot since the descent." Ryan looked at Tran, who was at the inner perimeter position, and who was indeed sitting with his left leg extended in a way that could mean nothing or could mean something that would complicate the extract. Ryan walked to Tran. "Let me see it," he said. Tran started to say it was fine. Ryan looked at him. Tran pulled up his pant leg. The ankle was swollen, not broken probably. The movement pattern didn't suggest fracture, but sprained and sprained in the specific way that made weight-bearing a question of willpower rather than structural capacity. Ryan looked at the ankle. He looked at Tran. You caught that on the slope, he said. I didn't want to slow anyone down, Tran said. You've been walking on a sprained ankle for 40 minutes without telling me. It's fine, Tran said, and his voice was steroidy, but Ryan could see the pain sitting in his jaw in the way his teeth were slightly set. Ryan sat back on his heels. Okay, he said. When we move, you're in the middle. If you need a hand, you say so. That's an order. Tran nodded. Ryan stood up and walked back to his position. He was aware, without looking, that Maya was watching him, and when he got back to his spot, she said quietly, he didn't want to be a liability. I know, Ryan said. He's 23, she said. I know that too. A pause, then she said, my father used to say that the bravest men he ever knew were also the ones most afraid of being seen as weak. She paused. He meant it as a warning, not a compliment. Ryan looked at her. How old were you when he told you that? 14, she said. He told me a lot of things at 14. I think he knew even then that he wasn't going to have as much time as he wanted to tell me things. Ryan looked out over the perimeter. He didn't say anything because there was nothing to say that was adequate to that, and Ryan Harrison had learned a long time ago that the impulse to fill silence with words was not always the right impulse. They sat in the quiet for 90 seconds, which was a long time in a hold position in hostile terrain. Then the radio crackled again. Eagle 1 Warhammer, I have an asset for you. It's not the asset you wanted. It's a 2-bird package, small frames that they can get into the secondary LZ. ETA 22 minutes. We'll be there, Ryan said. 22 minutes. The secondary LZ was 8 minutes from the shelf position at a normal pace. With Tran's ankle, call it 11 minutes. Ryan looked at his team. 11 minutes to the LZ, he said. Then we hold until the birds. Everyone ready. Affirmatives around the perimeter. Maya was already on her feet with the rifle system. They moved at 08:03, and at 08:07 Brannigan, who was back on point, stopped the column with a raised fist, and then immediately came back to Ryan at a pace that was faster than point men usually move backward. Contact ahead, Brannigan said. His voice was very quiet and very specific. 2 armed individuals 40 meters at the LZ approach. Ryan processed that. 2 armed individuals between them and the landing zone with 11 minutes until the helicopters arrived. Can we go around, he said. Brannigan shook his head. Terrain doesn't allow it. The LZ approach is the only viable path. Ryan looked at the team. Tran was standing on his sprained ankle with the particular expression of someone who had decided they were fine and was executing that decision through pure will. Kowalski had his hand on his rifle. Ferris was looking at Ryan, waiting for the call. Maya said, I need 30 seconds and a clear sight line. Ryan looked at her. She was not proposing to use the Barrett. The Barrett was the wrong tool for 40 meters, and she clearly knew that because what she was holding was not the rifle case, but the compact sidearm that had been on her kit since before they left the forward operating base. The one Ryan had noticed and not commented on because it was standard kit and she had every right to carry it. 30 seconds, she said again. If I can get to the left of the column and move up along the rock wall to the bend in the trail, I have a line of sight to that position. That's 15 meters from the contact, Ryan said. I know, she said. You've never done this before, he said. And he said it simply not as a criticism, just as a fact that needed to be on the table. Maya looked at him and her eyes were calm and clear and completely honest. No, she said, I haven't. A beat. But neither had my father, she said the first time. Ryan sat with that for exactly 2 seconds. Then he said, Kowalski, you're with her. Left of the column rock wall approach, move on my mark. I'll create a distraction from the front. Kowalski looked at Maya. Maya looked back. Ready, Kowalski said. Yes, she said. Ryan moved to the front of the column. He looked at Brannigan. 30 seconds, he said. Brannigan nodded. Ryan keyed the radio and transmitted a short burst of static, a specific pattern, a signal that would look like a malfunctioning radio to anyone monitoring the frequency. And then he said in a voice calibrated to carry just far enough, Eagle 1 to all elements, we are approaching the LZ. Repeat, approaching the LZ. Loud enough, directional enough to pull attention toward the front. What happened in the next 23 seconds, Ryan did not fully see because he was at the front of the column, maintaining the distraction, but he heard it 2 shots close. Spaced the sound of something heavy meeting rock, and then Kowalski's voice in his earpiece saying, clear. Ryan moved forward. At the bend in the trail, two armed men were down, and Maya was standing with her back against the rock wall, and her sidearm in a two-hand grip, and Kowalski was at her shoulder, scanning the approach. Maya looked at Ryan when he came around the bend. He looked at her face. He looked at her hands. Her hands were steady. Her face was not entirely steady, but not in the way that meant she was losing something. In the way that meant she was carrying something consciously and with intention, the way a person picked up a weight they knew was heavy and chose to carry it anyway because it was theirs to carry. Ryan looked at the approach. Clear. Move, he said. They moved. The two helicopters arrived at 0826 exactly 3 minutes after the team reached the secondary LZ, and the extract was fast and functional, and nobody got shot during it, which Ryan counted as the operational definition of a success. In the air heading back to the forward operating base, Ryan sat across from Maya in the cramped interior of the small frame helicopter and watched the mountain recede through the porthole window and thought about a great many things that he was not yet ready to say out loud. He looked at Maya. She was sitting with the rifle case across her knees and her hands flat on top of it and her eyes closed, and she was not sleeping. She was doing the other thing, the thing that happened right after when the system that had been running on operational necessity began to process what operational necessity had required. Ryan had done this himself after the Korengal. After 3 other operations, he was not going to name even inside his own head right now. He knew the particular texture of what Maya was experiencing, the way the body settled into the recognition that it had done something it could not undo, and that the not undoing was the right thing, and that the right thing did not protect you from the weight of it. He said her name. Just her name. Not a question, not a directive. She opened her eyes. He said, "You did right today." She looked at him for a long moment. "All of it," she said. "All of it," he said. And he meant it. Every piece of it. The shot, the descent, the shelf position, the trail approach, everything. She looked out the porthole window. "It doesn't feel like I thought it would," she said. "Which part?" She was quiet for a moment. "Any of it," she said. Ryan nodded slowly. "It never does," he said. "Anyone who tells you it feels the way they expected is either lying or hasn't been honest with themselves yet." Maya looked back at him. "How long does it take," she said, "before you're honest with yourself?" Ryan thought about that for a genuine moment, not a performative pause, an actual consideration of the question. "Depends on what you're being honest about," he said. "Some things a few days, some things," he paused. "Some things you're still working on 20 years later." Maya looked at the rifle case under her hands. "He knew it would feel like this," she said. "My father. He never said it directly, but I found something he wrote once in a notebook I wasn't supposed to find. He wrote, 'The ones who feel it are the ones worth keeping.'" She paused. "I didn't understand what he meant when I read it. I was 17. "And now," Ryan said. She looked at him. "I understand it completely," she said. "I just wish understanding it felt better." Ryan didn't have anything to add to that because it was true and complete, and adding to it would have been purely decorative one. He sat with it instead, letting it occupy the space it deserved. Brannigan, who was 2 seats down and had apparently been listening without appearing to listen, said, "For what it's worth," and then stopped. Everyone looked at him. Brannigan didn't start sentences that way unless he was going to finish them with something that cost him something. "For what it's worth," he said again. The shot was, "I've been in the field for 16 years. I've worked with every tier of shooter this country has. What you did this morning at that range in those conditions after the route we had to take to get there." He stopped. He looked at the ceiling of the helicopter. "That was the single finest piece of shooting I have ever personally witnessed." The helicopter was loud, but the space inside it went very quiet. Maya looked at Brannigan. He wasn't looking at her. He was still looking at the ceiling, the way men like Brannigan looked at the ceiling when they'd said something true and didn't want to watch it land. "Thank you," Maya said. "That's still not a compliment," Brannigan said. "That's a fact." "I know," she said. "That's why thank you." Ryan looked out the porthole again. The mountain was gone now, replaced by the flat brown certainty of the lower terrain, and the forward operating base would come into view in about 8 minutes, and after that there would be a debrief and a medical check and a communications log and 37 other procedural requirements that would occupy the next 6 hours, and Ryan was not looking forward to any of them. He was looking forward to one thing that was not on any procedural list. He was going to find Garrett. And he was going to tell Garrett that the intelligence target had been confirmed objective complete, exactly as predicted by exactly the person nobody had believed could do it. And then he was going to make sure, in the specific and documented way, that things got made sure in the United States military that what Maya Reeves had done today was on record in every file and system and evaluation that mattered. Not for her fame, not for his vindication. Because Ghost Reeves' daughter had carried 64 pounds up a mountain in the dark, adapted to 3 separate planned failures without flinching, made a shot that the entire intelligence apparatus of the United States government had characterized as barely possible, carried 2 more men home safely, in addition to the mission objective, and done all of it in a way that her father would have recognized as completely, specifically, unmistakably his. And that was not going to disappear into a classified file that nobody read. Ryan Harrison was going to make sure of that. They landed at the forward operating base at 0911. Castillo met them on the pad, and his face, when he saw all 6 team members step off the helicopter, was a complicated thing, relief and professional composure fighting for the same real estate. He looked at Ryan, he looked at Maya. Objective confirmed, he said. Confirmed, Ryan said. Castillo exhaled through his nose. He looked at the mountain, even though you couldn't see the specific mountain from here, even though all you could see was the general direction of the high country, where 6 people had spent the morning doing something that was going to be classified for a decade, and then briefly mentioned in a footnote of something else that was also classified. Ghost's daughter, Castillo said very quietly, not to anyone in particular. Maya had walked past him toward the operations building, the rifle case in her hands, already moving toward the next thing. She did not hear him, or perhaps she heard him and chose not to turn around. Ryan watched her go. Yes, he said to Castillo, and then some. Inside the operations building, Ryan went directly to the communications room and placed the report to General Kwan. The call took 4 minutes. Kwan asked 3 questions, all of them good ones, and Ryan answered all 3 of them with complete accuracy. When he was done, Kwan said, "The shooter's record." "Outstanding, Maher," Ryan said. "First operational deployment." "Yes, sir." A pause. "Make sure that's in the file," Kwan said. "Already planned on it, sir," Ryan said. He hung up. Down the hall in the small room adjacent to the armory, he could hear the sound of a rifle being broken down and clean the specific sequence of it, the particular rhythm of someone who maintained a weapon with the same seriousness they'd used to fire it, because the shot was only one part of the job, and some people understood that, and some people didn't. Maya understood it. Ryan leaned against the wall in the hallway and listened for a moment. Then Brannigan appeared beside him, 2 cups of something hot that approximated coffee in only the most charitable interpretation. He handed one to Ryan. They stood in the hallway and listened to the sound of the rifle being cleaned, and neither of them said anything, and the silence between them was the specific, comfortable silence of 2 people who have been through something together and don't need to narrate it to each other. After a while, Brannigan said, "You going to tell her?" Ryan looked at him. "Tell her what?" Ryan said. Brannigan looked at him with the expression of a man who had 16 years in the field and had a low tolerance for unnecessary indirection. "That you were wrong," Brannigan said. "In the briefing room, day 1. Ryan drank his approximation of coffee. "She already knows," he said. "She does," Brannigan agreed. "But there's knowing and there's being told." Ryan looked down the hallway toward the room where Maya was cleaning the rifle that had just done something history would never fully know about. He thought about Ghost's words on the tape, not about revenge, about his daughter, about the hope that she would become better than he had ever been. Not just a greater sniper, a greater human being. Ryan Harrison pushed off the wall. He walked down the hall. He knocked on the open door frame because she had her back to him, and the noise of the cleaning was enough that he didn't want to startle her, and she looked over her shoulder and saw him and set down what she was working on and waited. He said, "I need to tell you something." She waited. "The briefing room," he said. "Day 1. I looked at you and I made a judgment before I had any basis for one. I knew it when I said it, and I said it anyway." He paused. "That was wrong, not just tactically wrong, wrong." He held her gaze. "You deserve better than that from me, and I'm telling you that directly because you earned a direct statement." Maya looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was not triumphant. It was not the expression of someone collecting a debt. It was something much quieter, the expression of someone receiving something they'd needed for a long time and had almost stopped expecting to receive. Thank you, she said. Don't thank me for something I should have gotten right the first time, he said. She almost smiled. That almost smile again, the one that lived in the corners of her expression and never quite arrived all the way. My father used to say the same thing, she said. When he apologized, he'd say, "Don't thank me, I'm just correcting an error." She paused. Like it was just math. Maybe it is, Ryan said. Maybe, she said. He left her to the rifle. In the hallway, Brannigan was gone. The cup of bad coffee was sitting on the floor where Ryan had set it, and the operations building was settling into the particular atmosphere of a place that had been braced for something terrible and had come out the other side of it with all the people it was supposed to have. Ryan picked up his cup. He walked to the communications room. He sat down and he began to write the after-action report for an operation that had required a shot at 3,247 meters in gusting crosswind at altitude after a compromised approach executed by a first deployment shooter whose qualification the entire senior leadership of the mission had questioned. He wrote carefully. He wrote completely. He wrote the kind of report that left nothing out, because the kind of report that left things out was the kind of report that eventually became a footnote, and footnotes were where inconvenient truths went to be forgotten. He was not going to let this become a footnote. He typed Maya's name at the top of the shooter assessment, and he typed primary confirmed. And then he paused for a moment with his hands on the keyboard and thought about the first time he had heard her voice in the briefing room, correcting a specific and important error about who she was and why she was there. That's a Barrett .5. Oh, and I'm not here because of my father, he typed for the next 2 hours without stopping. Outside, the Afghan afternoon was doing whatever Afghan afternoons did, indifferent to the things that had happened in its mountains that morning, indifferent to the woman in the armory room who was quietly and methodically returning a rifle to the condition it would need to be in for whatever came next. She had no way to know, sitting there alone with the Barrett, that the next thing was going to require something harder than any shot. She had no way to know that the hardest part of the day hadn't happened yet. It was going to happen in a classified intelligence room 3 weeks from now, in a building that didn't appear on any public map, when an officer named Garrett sat across a table from Maya Reeves and told her the complete truth about her father's final mission. All of it, including the part that no one had ever told her, including the part that was going to change everything she thought she understood about why she had been carrying this rifle for 20 years. But that was 3 weeks away. Right now in the operations building at the forward operating base, the rifle was clean and the mission was complete, and all 6 people who had gone up the mountain had come back down it. And Ryan Harrison sat at a keyboard and made sure the record reflected exactly what had happened. That was the least he could do. It was also he was slowly beginning to understand the most important thing he had done all day. 3 weeks passed, and in those 3 weeks, Maya Reeves did not talk about the mountain. She came home with the rest of the team to a base in Virginia that felt smaller than she remembered it, quieter in a way that had nothing to do with actual sound and everything to do with the particular silence of a person carrying something they hadn't found words for yet. She went back to the armory. She repaired rifles. She showed up at 0600 and left at 1800 and did not volunteer information about Afghanistan to anyone who didn't already have clearance to ask, and most people didn't ask, because most people had learned the way people in this world eventually learned that some silences were not invitations. Ryan checked on her twice during those 3 weeks, not formally, not as a commander conducting a welfare check, though that would have been justified. He simply found reasons to be near the armory, a question about equipment, a signature needed on a form that could have waited, and both times she was fine in the specific way that people who are processing something enormous are fine, functional, present, carrying something behind her eyes that she had not yet decided what to do with. He didn't push. He had learned a long time ago that pushing didn't accelerate anything. It just taught people to hide better. On the morning of the 22nd day, Colonel Mitchell called Ryan's office. "There's a debrief," Mitchell said. "Full classified review of the Nazari operation. Intelligence wants Maya in the room." "For what purpose?" Ryan said. Mitchell was quiet for a moment, and it was the particular quality of his quiet that made Ryan sit forward in his chair. "There's information about her father's final mission," Mitchell said. "Information that wasn't included in the file you read. It's relevant to the operation, and frankly, Ryan, it's relevant to her, and the review board decided she needed to hear it directly rather than read it in a document. Ryan felt something tighten in his chest. What kind of information? I think it should come from Barrett, Mitchell said. He's the one who pulled the full record. I think it should come from him in the room with you there, if she wants you there. Does she know this meeting is happening? She's been notified, 1400 hours, Building 7. Ryan looked at the clock. It was 1100. He spent the next 3 hours doing work. He didn't remember doing later the specific kind of work that occupied hands and eyes without occupying the part of the brain that mattered. And at 1350, he walked to Building 7, and Maya was already standing outside the conference room door. She looked at him. You knew about this, she said. Mitchell told me an hour ago, Ryan said. I don't know what's in the file. I genuinely don't. She nodded slowly. She was holding a folder she hadn't been given yet, and an old habit hands needing something to do. Whatever it is, Ryan said, you don't have to go in there alone. I know, she said. That's why I asked Mitchell if you could be in the room. Something in Ryan's chest shifted at that, something he didn't examine closely because this was not the moment for it. Then let's go, he said. The conference room was small, windowless, the kind of room built for conversations that needed to stay inside four walls permanently. Barrett was already seated at the table with a single folder in front of him, sealed the classification markings visible even from the doorway. Mitchell sat beside him. Two other officers Ryan didn't recognize sat at the far end, observers, the kind of people who attended these meetings because regulation required witnesses and said nothing because regulation didn't require participation. Maya sat across from Barrett. Ryan sat beside her. Barrett looked at her for a moment before he spoke, and there was something in his face that Ryan hadn't seen on him before. Not the exhausted precision of a man delivering operational briefings, but something closer to genuine human hesitation. Ms. Reeves, he said, what I'm about to share with you is fully declassified as of this morning by order of General Kwan specifically so that you could receive it. It concerns the final mission of Gunnery Sergeant James Reeves in the Korengal Valley, October 2003. Maya's hands were flat on the table, still, waiting. You've read the official record, Barrett said. The after-action report, the citation for the Medal of Honor. Both of those documents are accurate as far as they go, but they were written for public consumption, and certain details were withheld not to deceive you, but because they were classified at the source protection level, tied to intelligence assets that remained active for years afterward. What details? Maya said. Her voice was even. Barrett opened the folder. Your father's patrol was not simply ambushed, he said. The ambush was the result of a compromised informant network, a local source your father had cultivated personally over 18 months, someone he trusted, someone who had provided actionable intelligence on insurgent movements throughout that valley. Barrett paused. That source was turned, not willingly. His family was taken. He was forced to feed false security assessments to your father's unit for 6 weeks before the ambush, under threat of his children being killed. Maya did not move. Your father knew, Barrett said quietly. 3 days before the ambush, he flagged inconsistencies in the source's reporting. He filed a formal concern with his command. The concern was not acted on in time that failure belongs to the chain of command, not to your father, and it's documented exactly that way in the classified review that followed. But your father knew going into that valley that something was wrong. He went anyway, Maya said. He went anyway, Barrett confirmed, because 40 Marines were already in motion and pulling them back would have exposed them to a different and possibly worse set of risks. And because, and this is in his own words from a personal recording he made the night before, which I'm about to play for you, he believed that if something happened, he wanted to be positioned to do something about it rather than positioned safely somewhere else. Maya's jaw tightened. You have a recording, she said. I have several, Barrett said. Most are operational, one is not. He placed a small device on the table. This is the personal recording your father made the night before the engagement, he said. It was recovered from his equipment after the operation. It was sealed for 20 years under a source protection classification because of details it contains about the compromised informant. That classification expired this year. I want you to hear it before I say anything else. Maya looked at the device. Her hands, which had been still, were no longer entirely still. Play it, she said. Barrett pressed the button. The recording was rough recorded in the field, the particular static quality of equipment that had been carried through dust and altitude and years of storage. But the voice that emerged was clear enough, and Ryan, who had read the transcript but never heard the actual recording, felt something move through his chest at the sound of it. A voice with weight in it, a voice that belonged to a man who had clearly already decided something important and was recording this for reasons that had nothing to do with operational record keeping. This is Reeves, personal log, not operational. If anyone other than my daughter ever hears this, that means something went wrong tomorrow, and I want it on record what I knew and when. A pause on the recording, the sound of wind faint. I think Hottie's been turned. I flagged it 3 days ago. Command hasn't acted. I don't have proof, just patterns, and patterns aren't enough to stop a mission that's already moving. So we're going in tomorrow, and I don't know what's waiting. Another pause. If something happens to me out there, I need someone to make sure my daughter knows the truth. Not the easy version, the real one. I made choices. I'd make them again. 40 men are counting on getting home tomorrow, and I am not going to be the reason any of them don't, even if I have an instinct telling me something's wrong with the ground we're walking onto. The voice changed then. Something in it softened, the operational cadence falling away. Maya, if you're hearing this, I need you to understand something, and I need you to understand it the way I mean it, not the way it might sound. Maya's breath caught audibly. Ryan didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the table, giving her what privacy the room could offer. I have watched you on that range since you were 7 years old, and I have never in my life seen anything like what you can do. Not from anyone. Not from men I served with who spent their entire careers chasing what you do without thinking about it. I used to lie awake worrying that I'd built something in you that you didn't ask for. That I'd made you into this because it was what I wanted, not what you wanted. A pause. The wind on the recording persistent. But I watched you grow into it your own way, and I figured out something important. It was never about the shooting. The shooting was just the thing you happened to be extraordinary at. What actually matters, what I hope to God you carry forward, no matter what happens to me, is what's underneath it. The patience, the refusal to take a shot you're not sure of, the way you've never once, not once, wanted to hurt anyone. You just wanted to be good enough to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. Maya's hand had moved to her mouth. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. I have a bad feeling, and bad feelings in this job are sometimes just exhaustion, and sometimes they're real. And I won't know which this is until it's already happening. But whatever happens, I need you to know that you don't owe this life to me. You don't owe me a legacy. If you want to put the rifle down and never touch one again, that is a complete and worthy life, and I will be just as proud of you. His voice caught just slightly, the first crack in it. But if someday, for your own reasons, in your own time, you ever decide to pick it back up, I want you to know something. You're going to be better than me, not just at this, at everything. You already are. The recording went quiet for a moment, just wind. Then, this is Reeves' ending personal log. Garrett switched off the device. The room was completely silent. Maya sat with her hands still at her mouth and her eyes were wet, and she was not making any effort to hide it because there was nothing left to perform in this room. Nothing left to prove. Ryan watched her, and he felt something in his own chest that he recognized distantly as grief that wasn't his to claim, but that he was feeling anyway, the specific grief of witnessing someone receive 20 years late, the words they had needed their entire life. Garrett let the silence sit for a long moment before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice was gentler than Ryan had ever heard it. There's one more thing, he said, and I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want it to land as something it isn't. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, composing herself with visible effort. Say it, she said. The informant your father was protecting, Garrett said. Hadi, he survived the ambush. He's been resettled under a new identity in a third country for the past 20 years under continuous U.S. protection in direct fulfillment of a personal commitment your father made to him before the engagement, a commitment that your father documented that command honored and that has been quietly maintained ever since. Maya looked at him. He's alive, she said. He's alive, Garrett confirmed. He has 3 children, now adults, all of whom are alive because your father refused to let the informant's family pay for something that was done to him against his will. Your father's last act of command authority the night before the ambush was to file the protection order for that family. He did that instead of sleeping. He did that instead of resting before a mission he suspected might kill him. Maya was quiet for a long moment. Why didn't anyone tell me this before, she said. Not angry, just genuinely asking. Source protection, Garrett said. If the details became public while the asset and his family were still vulnerable, it could have gotten them killed even after resettlement. We had to wait until enough time had passed and the threat had genuinely lapsed. I know that's not a satisfying answer. It's the true one. Maya nodded slowly. She looked at the device on the table, the small object that had just delivered her father's voice across 20 years. Can I keep that? She said. It's yours, Garrett said. It was always going to be yours. I'm sorry it took this long. Maya picked up the device and held it in both hands. The meeting ended a few minutes later, the kind of ending that didn't require formal closing remarks because everything that mattered had already been said. The two observing officers filed out quietly. Mitchell touched Maya's shoulder briefly on his way past a small gesture that needed no words attached to it. Garrett gathered his folder and paused at the door. For what it's worth, and he said, in 20 years of doing this work, I have read a great many after-action files. Your father's name comes up more than most. Not because of the Korengal, because of a dozen smaller things before decisions he made that protected people who never knew his name. He was the real thing, Ms. Reeves. I wanted you to hear that from someone who's actually read the entire record. He left. Maya sat at the table with the device in her hands, and Ryan sat beside her. And for a long while, neither of them said anything. Finally, Maya said, 20 years. I know, Ryan said. 20 years I thought he died chasing glory or following orders blindly, or she stopped. I built an entire story in my head about who he was in that valley, and none of it was this. What story did you build? Ryan asked gently. She was quiet for a moment, turning the device over in her hands. I thought he died because the mission mattered more than coming home, she said. I thought that was just what it meant to be him, that the quite always came first, even before me. I spent 6 years in an armory, partly because I was angry about that. Angry that I'd inherited his gift and resented the thing that took him from me at the same time. And now I know he was trying to save a family that wasn't even his, she said. He went into that valley suspecting it was a trap, not because the mission mattered more than coming home to me, but because 40 men were already moving, and he couldn't live with himself if he let them walk into something he could have stopped. She looked at Ryan. That's not the same story at all. No, Ryan said. It's not. She looked down at the recording device again. He said I don't owe this to him, she said. The rifle, the legacy. He said it 20 years ago before he even knew what kind of person I'd grow into, and he still wanted me to know I didn't owe him anything. Do you believe him? Ryan asked. Maya thought about that for a long time. I think, she said slowly, that for the first time in my life, I actually do. They sat together for a while longer in the small, windowless room, and Ryan didn't rush her, and eventually she stood up, the device held carefully in one hand, and said, I need some time, not a lot, just time. Take whatever you need, Ryan said. The team isn't going anywhere. She almost smiled at that, the almost smile, the one that lived at the edge of arriving. Thank you, she said, for being in the room. You didn't need me in there, Ryan said. You handled all of it yourself. I know, she said. I still wanted you there. She left. Ryan sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes after she'd gone, thinking about a man he had never met who had recorded a message to his daughter the night before he died, not knowing if she would ever hear it, hoping anyway that somehow, someday it would reach her. It had taken 20 years, but it had reached her. Over the following 2 weeks, something in Maya changed, not dramatically, not in a way that announced itself, but in the quiet, accumulating way that real change usually happened. She started coming to the range on her own time, not just for equipment testing, but to shoot, and Ryan noticed because he made a point of noticing, walking past the range more often than his actual duties required. One afternoon, he found her there alone, working through a series of mid-range drills with a precision rifle that wasn't the Barrett, something smaller, more maneuverable, and he stood at the edge of the range and watched her for a while before she noticed him. When she finished her string, she looked over and saw him. Different rifle, he said. I requested it, she said. I've been thinking about something. What's that? She set the rifle down on the bench and looked at him directly. I don't want to go back to the armory full time, she said. I appreciate everything that job gave me the years I needed to rebuild after my father died. But I'm not the person who walked into that workshop 6 years ago. I don't think I can pretend to be her anymore. Ryan felt something settle into place, something he had been quietly hoping for without admitting it to himself. What do you want instead? He said. I want to stay operational, she said. Not as a permanent solution to every impossible distance problem the military has. I'm not naive about what one person can sustainably do. But I want to train people. I want to take what I know, what my father taught me, what I learned on that mountain, and put it into other shooters before they ever have to learn it the way I did under fire with no margin for error. Ryan nodded slowly. That's a program that doesn't exist yet, he said. Not formally. I know, Maya said. I want to build it. Ryan looked at her for a long moment. I'll bring it to Mitchell, he said. And if Mitchell balks, I'll bring it to Quan myself. After what you did on that mountain, you've earned the right to be taken seriously when you propose something like this. You do that, Maya said. It wasn't quite a question. I do that, Ryan confirmed. I should have been taking you seriously from the first morning anyway. This is just me catching up. Maya picked her rifle back up, checked the chamber out of pure habit, and set it in its case. There's something else, she said, not looking at him directly, now her hands occupied with the latches of the case. What's that? Ryan said. The day in the briefing room, she said, when you said you needed America's best sniper, not a workshop technician. She closed the first latch. I went home that night and I almost quit. I sat in my apartment and I thought this is exactly why I stopped 6 years ago. Because no one was ever going to look at me and see what my father saw. They were always going to see the size of me first. Ryan didn't say anything. He let her finish. And then I thought about what he would have said if he'd seen me ready to quit, because one commander didn't believe me on day one, she said. She closed the second latch. He would have told me that the people who don't believe you yet aren't your problem. Your job is just to be undeniable. And then he would have told me to go back to that range and be undeniable. She looked up at him. So I did, she said. Ryan looked at her, and something in his chest that had been quietly building for weeks finally found its shape, finally became something he was willing to acknowledge, even just to himself. I'm glad you did, he said. Me too, she said. She picked up the case and started toward the equipment shed, and then she stopped and looked back at him. Ryan, she said. It was he realized only the second time she'd used his first name. The first had been on the mountain in the 4 seconds before the shot that changed everything. Yeah, he said. Thank you for reading the whole file, she said, before you ever met me properly. Thank you for caring enough to be wrong about something and then doing the work to find out why. She walked away before he could answer, which was probably for the best, because Ryan Harrison did not have a ready answer for that, only a feeling in his chest that he was going to need considerably more time to fully understand. He stood at the range for a while after she'd gone, looking down the lanes toward the targets, thinking about Ghost Reeves' voice on that recording, about a man who had told his daughter 20 years in advance that she didn't owe anyone a legacy, and about a daughter who had spent 6 years grieving in a workshop before finally walking back out onto a range and proving to a world that hadn't asked her to that she was exactly what her father always knew she would become. Not simply a greater sniper. Something more than that. Ryan walked back toward the operations building, already composing in his head the proposal he was going to bring to Mitchell, already thinking about what Maya Reeves' training program could become if the right people got out of its way and let it. He had no idea, walking across that base in the late afternoon light, how far that idea was eventually going to travel, or how many lives it would eventually touch, or what it would come to mean to a generation of shooters who would never personally witness the shot at 3,247 meters, but who would carry forward everything that shot had ultimately been about. That was still ahead of him. For now, there was a proposal to write and a promise to keep, and a woman who had finally, after 20 years, stopped carrying her father's death as a wound and started carrying his words as a compass instead. The proposal Ryan brought to Mitchell took 11 pages, and it took Mitchell exactly 4 days to bring it to General Quan. And it took Quan exactly 1 meeting to approve something Ryan had expected would take months of bureaucratic friction to move even an inch. You're telling me, Quan said, reading the final page of the proposal in front of both of them, that you want to build a precision operations training pipeline, and you want Maya Reeves to run it. Yes, sir. After one operational deployment that solved a problem this entire command had quietly accepted might not be solvable, Ryan said. Sir, with the respect, I don't think we get to call her credentials thin anymore. Quan looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back down at the proposal, flipped to the page outlining curriculum structure, and read in silence for almost a full minute. This section, he said, tapping the page. Psychological resilience under extended solo deployment. Where did this come from? From her, Ryan said. Not from me. I asked her what the existing sniper training pipeline was missing. She didn't talk about marksmanship. She talked about isolation, about what happens to a person's mind after weeks alone with a rifle and a mission and no one to talk to. She said the technical skill gets people through qualification. The psychological preparation is what gets them through an actual deployment without breaking. Quan closed the folder. Approved, he said, and effective immediately. She reports to you operationally, administratively to Mitchell. 6-month pilot program, 12 candidates, full review, at completion. Yes, sir. Harrison. Ryan stopped at the door. Don't screw this up, Quan said. I'm not talking about the program. I'm talking about how you talk to her. I read your after-action report. I read between the lines of your after-action report. Don't screw this up. Ryan felt something warm spread up the back of his neck. Understood, sir, he said, and left before Quan could see exactly how visible that warmth had become. He told Maya that afternoon, standing at the edge of the range where she'd been running drills with 3 rotating recruits Mitchell had quietly pre-screened as candidates for the program on the theory that approval was inevitable and there was no sense wasting 6 months. Maya set down her spotting scope when he told her. She didn't say anything for a moment. 12 candidates, she said finally. 12 candidates, Ryan confirmed. 6-month pilot. You design the curriculum. I provide operational oversight. Mitchell handles administration, so neither of us has to deal with paperwork. And if it works, Ryan said, it becomes permanent, and it becomes the standard not just for this command, but potentially across the whole sniper pipeline. Maya looked out across the range at the 3 recruits she'd been training. Young, eager, none of them yet aware of how much the job was actually going to ask of them. My father would have loved this, she said quietly. I think he'd have loved who's running it more, Ryan said. She looked at him. The almost smile arrived finally all the way for the first time since Ryan had met her. You're getting better at that, she said. At what? Saying the thing instead of almost saying it. Ryan felt his own mouth pull into something unfamiliar, something that had been rusty for longer than he wanted to admit. I'm working on it, he said. The pilot program began 3 weeks later. 12 candidates pulled from across the Marine and Army sniper communities, all of them experienced shooters, none of them prepared for what Maya had built. The curriculum was unlike anything any of them had encountered. Technical marksmanship woven directly into psychological conditioning, every range session paired with deliberate stress inoculation, every qualification test designed not just to measure accuracy, but to measure what happened to that accuracy when everything around it was falling apart. Ryan watched the first cold weather qualification from the same spotting position he'd used months earlier, when Maya herself had been the one in the crosshairs of other people's doubt. A young sergeant named Reyes was lying in the snow, working through a moving target drill that Maya had personally designed, and at the 7th shot he flinched, missed, and immediately began the particular spiral of self-criticism that Ryan had seen destroy promising shooters before. Maya was beside him in seconds. Stop, she said, not harsh, direct. Reyes stopped. What just happened in your head, she said, between the miss and right now? I don't know, Reyes said. You do know, Maya said. Tell me. Reyes was quiet for a moment. I thought about my CEO watching the scores, he said. I thought about what happens if I don't qualify. And what happened to your hands while you were thinking about that? Reyes looked at his hands, which were, Ryan could see even from a distance, slightly less steady than they'd been 30 seconds earlier. They tightened up, Reyes said. Right, Maya said. Your scope doesn't care about your CO. Your scope doesn't care about qualification. Your scope only cares about what's happening in your body in the next 4 seconds. Everything else is noise you brought with you. Put it down. It's not coming down the mountain with you. Reyes breathed, visibly deliberately. He took the next shot. It landed dead center. Ryan, watching from the spotting position, thought about a cold morning months earlier when a colonel had said quite a toy for a technician, and a woman who had earned every inch of her place in this world had answered without raising her voice at all. He thought she's teaching them exactly what she had to learn alone. The pilot program ran its full 6 months, And at the end of it, 11 of the 12 candidates qualified at a level the standard pipeline rarely produced. And the 12th candidate, Reyes, as it happened, washed out not for lack of skill, but by his own request, having decided during the program that the psychological weight of the role wasn't a weight he wanted to carry. A decision Maya treated not as failure, but as exactly the kind of honest self-assessment the program was designed to produce. That's not a failure, she told him the day he submitted his withdrawal. That's the program working. I'd rather you find that out here on a range than 3,000 meters up a mountain with no way back. Reyes nodded, visibly relieved in a way he hadn't expected to feel. Thank you, he said, for not making me feel small about it. You're not small, Maya said. You're honest. There's a difference, and most people never learn it. When General Kwan reviewed the pilot program's full results 6 months later, he didn't just approve permanent funding. He approved expansion 3 additional training sites, full integration into the formal sniper qualification pipeline, and a name for the program that Mitchell had proposed and that Kwan had signed off on without hesitation. The Reeves Protocol. Maya cried when she heard the name. Not in front of anyone official. Ryan happened to be there in the small office that had become hers over the past year. When Mitchell delivered the news, and after Mitchell left, she sat very still for a long moment and then put her face in her hands. Ryan didn't say anything. He simply stayed in the room with her the way he'd learned to stay in rooms with her present without crowding until she lifted her head. He never got a program named after him, she said. 20 years and a Medal of Honor, and he never got something like this. Maybe this is his, Ryan said. Through you, maybe that's exactly how it was always supposed to work. Maya wiped her eyes. You sound like him sometimes, she said. I don't know if you realize that. I've read his file more times than I've read almost anything in my career, Ryan said. Some of it must have stuck. A long pause. I'm glad it did, Maya said. 2 years passed. The Reeves Protocol expanded to 9 training sites across 3 branches of the U.S. military, and Maya Reeves became, without ever seeking the title, one of the most quietly influential figures in American special operations training. She turned down 3 separate opportunities for public recognition, a documentary production, a congressional commendation ceremony, a national magazine profile that would have made her briefly a household name. I don't want the story to be about me, she told Ryan the 3rd time she declined a public appearance. I want it to be about what the work produces. The moment it becomes about me, people start training to be famous instead of training to come home. Ryan by then understood exactly what she meant, because he had watched her build something that was fundamentally not about her, even though every piece of it had come from inside her. From 20 years of grief and skill, and a father's voice on an old recording device that she still kept. He knew in a drawer in her quarters, and still listened to on certain nights when the weight of the work got heavy enough to need it. The veteran Marine Scout sniper community held a private gathering 18 months into the Reeves Protocol's official existence, not a ceremony, not a media event, just a closed-door dinner at a private facility outside Quantico. Men and women who had spent decades in the field, men and women who did not gather easily or often, all of them choosing to be in the same room on the same night for one specific reason. Ryan was there. He watched from the back of the room as one veteran after another stood one by one, hardened operators who had not shown public emotion in front of colleagues in years, and each of them spoke briefly simply about what the Reeves Protocol had changed in their units, in their understanding of what training was supposed to do in the survival rates of people they personally cared about. The last man to stand was an older Marine, gray-haired, leaning slightly on a cane that nobody questioned, because everyone in that room knew exactly what kind of mission had put it there. I served with Ghost Reeves, he said, 2 deployments. I was there the day he got the news his daughter was born. I have never seen a man's face do what his face did that day. He paused, his voice steadying with effort. I didn't know until 18 months ago that the daughter he was so proud of that day would end up doing more for this community than almost anyone in 3 decades. I think he knew. I think somehow that man knew exactly who he was holding. He raised his glass. To Ghost, he said, and to the daughter who proved she never needed to become him. She just needed to become herself. The room rose. Glasses lifted. Maya, seated near the front, did not stand immediately. For a moment, she simply sat with her hand pressed flat against her chest, and Ryan, watching from the back of the room, understood that she was not performing composure. She was simply absorbing something too large to process standing up. Then she rose slowly and faced the room and said nothing at all, because there was nothing that needed saying. and the silence held the weight of it better than words could have. Afterward, in the quiet of the parking lot, Ryan found her standing alone, looking up at a clear winter sky, her breath visible in the cold. "You okay?" he said. "I keep waiting for it to stop feeling unbelievable," she said. "The program, the respect, all of it. Some part of me still expects to walk into a room and have someone look at me and see a workshop technician. That part of you is going to have to get used to disappointment," Ryan said, "because that's never happening again." She looked at him. "You sound very sure of that." "I am very sure of that," he said. She studied his face for a moment in the cold parking lot light. "You've changed," she said, "since that first morning in the briefing room." "I'd hope so," he said. "I'd be a pretty poor commander if 2 years and everything we've been through left me exactly the same person." "That's not what I mean," she said. "I mean you specifically. The way you carry yourself, the way you—" She stopped choosing her words with the same precision she brought to a wind calculation. "You used to need to be right before you trusted anyone. Now you trust first and figure out the rest as you go." Ryan thought about that. "I learned that from someone," he said. "Who?" "A woman who walked into my briefing room in coveralls 2 sizes too big and proved inside of about 90 seconds at a qualification range that I had absolutely no idea what I was looking at." Maya's almost smile arrived fully the way it had been arriving more often in the past year. "I remember her," she said. "She's better now," Ryan said, "than she was that morning." "Better how?" "She's not carrying her father's death like a wound anymore," Ryan said. "She's carrying his words like a compass. There's a difference. I watched her make that change." Maya was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "There's something I never told you about that first qualification, the moving target." Ryan looked at her. "You knew I was going to activate it," he said. "It wasn't a question. He'd suspected it for 2 years." "I knew there was a strong chance," she said. "Dolan's tell, he kept glancing at the secondary control panel during setup. My father taught me to watch for tells in everyone in a room, not just the people across from you." She paused. "I knew you were testing me beyond the stated parameters. I decided not to let on because I wanted you to see exactly what I could do when I thought no one was watching that closely." Ryan stared at her. "You've known for 2 years that I tried to set you up to fail," he said, "and you never said anything." "I wasn't upset about it," she said. "I understood why you did it. You needed proof bigger than a piece of paper. I just wanted you to know now because I think you've earned knowing that I saw exactly what you were doing, every step of it, and I decided to meet it instead of resent it." Ryan let out a breath that turned to fog in the cold air. "You're a remarkable person, Maya Reeves," he said. "I had a remarkable teacher," she said. "2 of them, actually." She looked at him when she said it long enough that the meaning was unmistakable, and Ryan felt something settle in his chest that had been circling for 2 years, looking for somewhere honest to land. He didn't say anything else that night. Some things didn't need to be said immediately. Some things were better carried for a little while before they were spoken, the way Maya had once explained that a shot needed its pause, that the gust always passed if you were patient enough to wait for the stillness underneath it. Years later, and this part of the story belongs not to a single dramatic moment, but to the slow accumulation of an entire life built well, Maya Reeves commanded her own division of precision operations training across the U.S. military, mentoring a generation of shooters who would never personally witness the shot at 3,247 meters, but who carried forward in every range session and every psychological conditioning module and every honest conversation about fear exactly what that shot had ultimately been about. She kept a single item in her office framed on the wall behind her desk. Not a medal, not a citation, not a photograph from any operation. It was her father's final letter, the handwritten one, discovered among his personal effects, years after the recording had already reached her words that had waited even longer than the recording had to find their way to her hands. "You never had to become me. You only had to become yourself." Underneath it, she had added a single line in her own handwriting, something she told every candidate who walked through her program on their first day, something that had become, without her ever intending it, the unofficial creed of the Reeves Protocol. "True strength is not measured by how perfectly you can pull a trigger. It is measured by knowing when you no longer need to." Ryan Harrison retired from active command 11 years after a cold morning in Virginia, when he looked at a small woman in oversized coveralls and decided before she'd said a single word that she couldn't possibly be what the files said she was. He spent those 11 years watching her prove him wrong in ways that reshaped an entire community, and he spent every one of those years after the first standing beside her, rather than simply commanding above her in every sense that mattered. The last time anyone asked Maya Reeves about the shot that started it all, the 247-meter kill that ended Khalid Nazari's reign of terror and began everything that came after, she didn't talk about the wind calculation or the gusting crosswind or the 4 seconds it took the round to travel across that valley. She talked about a father who recorded a message the night before he died, hoping it would someday reach a daughter he wasn't certain he'd live to raise. She talked about a commander who was wrong about her on the first day and brave enough to say so out loud once he understood exactly how wrong he'd been. And she talked about every single recruit who had walked into her program believing that strength meant never feeling fear, and walked out understanding that real strength was something else entirely. Something quieter, harder, and far more rare. That was Maya Reeves' legacy, not the shot, the person the shot revealed her to already be. And that legacy, built on 20 years of grief transformed into purpose, would outlast every record she ever set on a firing range, carried forward in the hands and hearts of every shooter she trained, to be undeniable exactly the way her father once told her in the dark the night before he gave his life, so that hers could mean something more.